Let's discuss certain strings that you can find in Android applications that are useful for bug bounty hunting, and also when you're just looking through the application in general to gain some more information that might actually trigger other processes such as reconnaissance on a URL, etc. So common hard-coded strings are something we're going to be wanting to look through our application for. And a lot of hard-coded strings can be found in this thing called the resources/strings.xml. In just a minute, we'll go through the actual application and show you that file. But also hard-coded strings can be found in the activity source code. So for our different UI elements, we might actually have a hard-coded string that is used in that activity. Maybe if it's a coupon code for an application, we might be looking at a hard-coded coupon code that is a testing coupon code, or could also be looking at any number of things for hard-coded strings in activity, such as things like URLs, API keys, etc. So the threat vector we're looking for here are things like login bypass, which could be utilized by a combination of a hard-coded username and password, or also if you're dealing with an API, it might be something like a client credential, a secret key, and a client ID, something like that you'd be looking for. You'd also be looking for anything like URLs that are exposed. So maybe it's a new URL that you never knew was related to this company, but you can find it in the Android source code or within the strings.xml. We'll also be looking for things like API keys that might be exposed, looking for a string like containing API or the word secret, right? We'll also be looking for things like the Firebase URLs that might be utilized to store some information from this app. So let's jump into JADX now and actually take a look for some of these strings, and I'll show you the methodology that I kind of use when I'm looking for these strings. So here I am in JADX, and I'm going to go to resources here, and then I'm going to go to resources.arsc, and I have the injured Android application open here. I'm going to click res here. I'm going to click values next, and this is where a lot of XML files are defined for the application. For example, if we click this attributes here, has some basic information about different attributes that are utilized throughout the application. You can see things like badges, bar lengths, things like that that are kind of related to the UI. We can also go to these strings.xmls here, and now we see a bunch of hard-coded strings. And right here at the top of the hard-coded strings, we actually see an AWS ID and an AWS secret key. This will be utilized in one of our flags a bit later. But if we scroll through this file, you can see all these types of strings, and usually these strings are something like a little string that's shown in the UI right here. Like here it says there's a way to bypass the main activity and invoke other activities that are exported. That is something that pops up in the application itself. You can also keep on scrolling down here, and as you look through here, you want to look for anything that might be suspicious, anything that might give you some more information about the application, or possible things like client IDs or URLs. So for example here's a default web client ID. These are not usually something that is sensitive, but you could be looking for a client ID generally speaking. Scrolling down a bit more, we find this Firebase database URL. This could be something helpful for us. This is a new website we did not know about before, so we want to go out and do our research and see how this URL is being used by the application. Scrolling down a bit more, we have the Google API key here, and the Google App ID, and the Google Crash Reporting API key. Now this Google, especially if you see a Google Maps ID or a key here, that can be utilized to make a bunch of calls using their map service, and you can actually run over costs and things like that on the Android application. You can also see that we have this like injured Android.appspot Google storage bucket. So this is something else that's new that you want to go out and do some actual research on. Scrolling down a bit more, there doesn't seem to be much more sensitive here. We just have some things that are strings like, flag 4 activity, things that are within the application here. But you would want to keep on looking through this file and make sure that you did not miss anything. Something nice about JADX 2 is that you can always do a Control F. So if I wanted to look in this file specifically for certain things, I could just do API here, it will start finding all the things with API. Obviously, we're going to run into some things that have API as part of the word, but like for example, this finds the Google API key, and if I keep on pressing enter, it will go through all the results here. You also want to look for things like ID or password in this file if you can find anything related to passwords. If there maybe was a password that you missed when you were scrolling through the file. In this case, as we're going through this, there's not really any here, but it's something I would still look for in the strings.xml. Obviously, anything else would be something like AWS, for example, which in our case is going to get this AWS ID and that AWS secret key that we saw at the top of this strings.xml file. So you'd want to look for common things like that. And also, if there's a lot of things in here, you would want to do something like looking for HTTP or HTTPS, right? And we would get the injured Android HTTPS here, and there's not really any other HTTPSs in the strings.xml. We can also go to other files that are here, such as the XMLs.xml, see if anything is stored there. These two are the most common ones where I've found certain things being stored, the XMLs.xml and also the strings.xml. There might possibly be interesting things in integers someday if you're dealing with something that might have different, maybe a coupon code is an integer defined in this type of area. But we can also extend our search for hard-coded strings far outside of the strings.xml. This is not the only file that we need to look at. And a nice feature about JADX, why I like this tool so much, is there's this magic wand text search tool right here in the top left. So I'm going to click this, and what this allows you to do is it allows you to search through all the source code for certain text. So when I'm just doing a quick look over an application and looking through the source code, I will use this magic wand to do some basic searches. So for example, if I'm looking for URLs, I will do http:// like this and try to find where all of these HTTPs are to see where clear text traffic might be being sent by the application. And the cool thing about JADX here is that you can also increase the scope of your search. So you can go to the classes, the methods, the fields, and also the code. For now, I'll leave it on code. And you can see here that we pulled up some HTTP addresses here that we didn't see before, and these are not really sensitive ones, but it's possible that you might find that kind of thing in the application source code when you're doing this for a different application. Obviously, I can change this to HTTPS, and see what has changed here. You can see some references to, say, for example, plus.google.com, some references here also to some Firebase type of things, like the Firebase database encountered some errors, things like that. But the bad part about this, as you can see, is that we're not getting the exact same strings that we found in the .xml file. So this is actually kind of searching the source code as opposed to those resources. And that's why we need to search in both locations. And likewise, I can obviously do things like API here. I'm sorry, I keep on closing the window. You can see all the places where API is called in our source code. You can see like signin.api here for one of these methods. A usage of the Google API key, and all these results are paginated as well. So you have to go through every single one of these pages as you're looking through. There's not really anything particularly sensitive here, but it's something that I would do if I was doing this for an application. Likewise, I would look for any instance where there was maybe a password. Sorry, I will change this to password and not press enter this time, and see where passwords might be in the actual source code. So like for example here, we have flag 7 password encrypted. Some kind of a password is being encrypted for one of these flags. So I would also look for obviously things like username, kind of similar thing like we did for the strings.xml to try to find anything. And also I would look for like firebase.io, see if that's being called anywhere in the code as well, if there's a different Firebase database. And also something you can do is look for anything related to SQL statements. So for example here we can see like flag 7 SQL like activity comes up. You can also see some portions of some SQL code that is being used by this application. And here we actually have this thing called this is a test.db. And this can give you some hints about where the application data might actually be stored in a SQLite database. So we can actually see this later. When we get to the dynamic analysis section, we'll be taking a look at this database and looking at what kind of data is actually stored in there. So that's kind of the methodology that I use when I'm using JADX. I will go through the resources and go to that strings.xml file. Obviously, take a good manual look through there for anything that might be sensitive, and also use Control F to try to find certain things. And then I will expand my scope to the source code by using this magic wand tool to look for anything related to SQL, HTTP, HTTPS, API keys, usernames, passwords, anything like that that you think might be sensitive. Also, another good keyword to use is just the word key. Now here, I got 7,000 results, so you might want to add some things in here, and maybe you want to look for things like a client ID. You can see here maybe a client ID or a client secret if they're being defined anywhere in the source code. Let me change this to a C. No instances of client secret, but this is exactly what I would do if I was doing a bug bounty hunt against an application that I didn't know anything about, and as part of my static analysis process, so I have a holistic look at the application. I looked at the strings.xml, I looked at the xmls.xml, and I looked through the source code, generally speaking, for certain things. And then after I get some semblance of what is stored out there in the application, then I will go out and start to exploit some of the activities and move on to some of the stages like we'll see in the next video when I'm actually exploiting some of the flags in the Intro to Android application.